It was a quiet morning at Buckingham Palace, the kind of morning where the sun barely touches the spires of the royal residence, and the corridors echo with footsteps that seem to belong to another time. But inside the heart of the palace, a storm was brewing, one that no amount of pomp, protocol, or centuries-old tradition could contain. King Charles, the man who had spent decades preparing for the crown, was now facing a truth that none of the royal tutors, advisors, or even the public had ever imagined he would confront so openly. His health was failing, and the prognosis was dire. The whispers that had started as vague concerns among palace aides, the brief shadows of uncertainty cast during private engagements, and the fleeting glimpses of worry in the eyes of his children were now crystallizing into an unavoidable reality. A terminal illness had been confirmed, and suddenly, the weight of mortality pressed down on one of the most scrutinized men in the world. For months, the palace had tried to keep the situation under wraps. Official appearances were meticulously planned, public engagements were carefully choreographed, and every photo, every handshake, every smile broadcast to the world had been filtered through layers of secrecy and control. The goal was clear: maintain the illusion of strength, of continuity, of an enduring monarchy that could withstand anything. But inside the private chambers, the truth was unrelenting. Prince William, Prince Harry, Princess Anne, and even the young Catherine, who had only recently become a mother herself, were grappling with emotions that they had no way to publicly express. Tears had been shed behind closed doors, whispered conversations had turned to quiet sobs in the corridors, and the family had begun to feel the crushing weight of inevitability. It was not just the illness itself, but the timing, the exposure, the sudden realization that centuries of tradition offered no shield against the fragility of life. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The announcement of such a revelation is never simple. In the royal family, nothing is ever truly private, yet the public is rarely privy to the most intimate struggles. And now, with King Charles's condition confirmed, a delicate dance had begun. How does a family prepare for the loss of its patriarch in full view of the world? How does a nation reconcile the mortality of a man who has, for decades, been seen as larger than life? And how does a family decide what to share, when even the smallest leak could ignite a media frenzy that might overshadow the gravity of the moment? These were questions that the palace advisors, doctors, and confidants wrestled with daily, and the answers were anything but simple. On the day that everything came to a head, there had been an unusual stillness in the palace gardens. The usual hum of activity, the whisper of tourists beyond the gates, the chatter of palace staff, had all but disappeared. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with tension. Prince William was pacing a hallway that had seen countless generations of royalty, his mind racing as he tried to reconcile the duties he had inherited with the personal anguish that he felt. Princess Anne, ever composed in public, allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability, her fingers trembling over a handwritten note she had just received from the palace doctor. Catherine, standing nearby, had her arms wrapped around her youngest child, a symbolic gesture of protection, love, and the realization that life's fragility touched every generation. It was a tableau of private grief set against centuries of public expectation. What made this revelation even more shocking was not merely the nature of the illness, but the way it shattered the carefully constructed veneer of invulnerability. King Charles had been a figure of resilience, of preparation, of duty above all else. From his early days as Prince of Wales, he had been groomed to embody the monarchy, to navigate the delicate balance between public service and private conviction. Yet here he was, confronted with the same ultimate challenge that binds every human being: mortality. And for the first time in decades, the family that had been trained to project strength, unity, and composure found themselves vulnerable, raw, and unguarded. The emotions that had been held at bay, neatly tucked behind stiff collars and formal speeches, now surged forward with a force that could no longer be contained. Outside the palace walls, life continued as it always had, oblivious to the private storm raging within. Media outlets speculated quietly, reading subtle signs in King Charles's engagements and appearances. Royal watchers noticed the slight changes in his demeanor, the occasional pause that lasted too long, the thinness of his smile. Yet even the most seasoned observers could not have anticipated the gravity of what was truly unfolding. The contrast between the public's perception of continuity and the private reality of urgency created a tension that was almost unbearable. In those moments, the palace was a microcosm of human vulnerability, a reminder that beneath the gilded facades and centuries of tradition, even kings are subject to the inexorable march of time and the fragility of the human body. And within this tension lay a deeper, more personal story, one that transcended politics, protocol, and pageantry. It was a story of familial bonds stretched to their limits, of love intertwined with responsibility, and of the inescapable confrontation with loss. Prince William, who had spent years observing his father's stoicism, now wrestled with the knowledge that he would soon be called upon to step into roles for which he had only ever prepared theoretically. Princess Anne, who had been the embodiment of duty and service, found herself grappling with a helplessness that no amount of experience could mitigate. Catherine, whose life had been transformed by marriage and motherhood, realized that even the youngest among them could not escape the shadow of this revelation. And King Charles himself, though stoic, bore the weight of knowing that the world would soon be watching every reaction, every decision, every expression as the family navigated what was coming. The palace corridors, usually bustling with staff moving with quiet efficiency, now felt like a stage set for the unfolding of history. Meetings with doctors, private consultations, and hurried strategy sessions took place behind closed doors, each one layered with urgency and secrecy. Every conversation carried the unspoken weight of mortality, a reminder that the days ahead would be measured not just in public engagements, but in the precious, fleeting hours of human life. And amidst all this, the question lingered in every mind. How would the world react when the truth could no longer be contained? Would the nation rally in solidarity, or would the exposure of such vulnerability create chaos and speculation beyond anyone's control? Even within the royal family, emotions ran a spectrum of intensity. There were moments of fierce composure, where duty demanded a face unmarked by fear or grief. There were moments of private despair, where tears were shed in solitude, unobserved but profoundly felt. And there were moments of silent reflection, where each member grappled with their own mortality and the realization that life's certainties are never guaranteed, no matter the crown, the wealth, or the legacy one inherits. These moments, though invisible to the public eye, were the essence of the story that would soon unfold, a story of humanity, fragility, and the unyielding passage of time. Yet even as the palace wrestled with this private tragedy, the world outside was unknowingly on the brink of witnessing a revelation that would shock millions. Rumors would soon swirl into headlines. Whispers would become global speculation, and the tightly held secrecy that had protected the family for months would begin to unravel. And in this space between secrecy and exposure, between private grief and public scrutiny, the royal family would confront challenges that were both intensely personal and historically unprecedented. For King Charles, Prince William, Princess Anne, and Catherine, this was not just a moment of illness, but a crucible that would test the strength of their bonds, the resilience of the monarchy, and the humanity that underpins even the most exalted lives. What the public would eventually see was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the polished statements, carefully staged appearances, and meticulously crafted images lay a storm of emotion, fear, and preparation. Each member of the family carried the weight of unspoken truths, the burden of roles that demanded both public composure and private vulnerability. And in this delicate balancing act, every choice mattered. How to communicate with the media, how to protect the younger generation, how to navigate the complex interplay of national expectations and personal grief. These were decisions that could define not just a reign, but the personal legacy of a family that had lived under the world's gaze for centuries. The tension inside the palace continued to mount as the news of King Charles's condition slowly sank in. Every decision, every movement, now carried a weight previously unimaginable. Even the most seasoned royal aides, those who had spent decades navigating protocol and secrecy, found themselves questioning the limits of discretion. What was once routine now felt monumental. The mere act of walking through a corridor or making a brief phone call had transformed into a delicate operation, each step calculated to avoid unnecessary panic or premature leaks. The palace, often seen by the public as a symbol of steadfast continuity, had become a crucible of anxiety and vulnerability, a place where even the most ordinary gestures were tinged with extraordinary consequence. Prince William, who had grown up under the shadow of expectation and responsibility, found himself confronting a reality that he had always understood in theory but never fully internalized. The role of future king had always been a distant horizon, a set of responsibilities to be gradually assumed. But now, with his father's mortality starkly evident, those responsibilities were no longer theoretical. The weight of succession, of the continuity of the monarchy, pressed upon him with a sudden urgency. He felt the pangs of fear not just for the throne but for the father he had loved and admired, whose health had silently begun to erode over months of guarded secrecy. William's heart was caught between duty and emotion, a conflict that left him sleepless, pacing the long corridors of the palace in search of clarity and reassurance that could not be found in official documents or royal protocols. Princess Anne, the ever-practical and composed figure of the family, experienced the situation differently, yet no less intensely. Her usual stoicism, honed over decades of public service and personal responsibility, faltered in the private chambers where she could no longer mask the emotional toll. Anne's hands, so often steady while managing complex charity events and public engagements, now trembled as she held medical reports and personal notes from doctors. The veneer of composure she presented to the world had been carefully cultivated over decades, yet here, in the intimate confines of the palace, she faced the inescapable vulnerability of knowing that the patriarch of her family was nearing the end of life. The private grief she felt was compounded by the awareness that public scrutiny would soon converge with personal mourning, creating an emotional landscape where every gesture, every word, and every decision could ripple far beyond the palace walls. Catherine, younger than her siblings-in-law and still navigating the early years of her royal marriage and parenthood, confronted an entirely different dimension of this crisis. The awareness that life's fragility was now no longer theoretical but undeniable brought a profound sense of urgency and protectiveness. Her children, innocent witnesses to the subtle shifts in palace atmosphere, were at once a source of solace and an additional responsibility. Every choice Catherine made was filtered through the lens of safeguarding her young family, while simultaneously grappling with the harsh realities of King Charles's terminal diagnosis. Even in moments of quiet reflection, when she thought herself alone, the weight of impending loss lingered, shaping thoughts, actions, and the delicate balance between her public role and private emotional response. As the news continued to ripple through the palace, advisors and aides worked tirelessly behind closed doors to manage the logistical and emotional fallout. Meetings with medical professionals were frequent and exhaustive, each session a blend of clinical assessment and delicate counseling. The need to coordinate appearances, manage public statements, and maintain operational stability of the monarchy was an immense burden. Decisions that might have once seemed routine, rescheduling an event, arranging for an aide to handle correspondence, or adjusting a schedule, now carried the gravity of potential exposure and public speculation. Every move required careful deliberation, and the stakes had never been higher. The intersection of health, duty, and perception created a tension that was palpable in every hallway, office, and private chamber of the palace. The human side of the story, often hidden behind centuries of tradition and the rigid expectations of royalty, became increasingly evident. King Charles himself, though outwardly composed, struggled with the personal implications of his diagnosis. The weight of mortality, the awareness of a limited timeline, and the knowledge that his family would face the world without him created moments of private vulnerability rarely, if ever, seen by the public. In these moments, the monarch was no longer a symbol of enduring authority, but a man confronting the ultimate uncertainty, the end of life and the leaving of loved ones behind. His personal reflections, punctuated by quiet conversations with trusted aides and family members, revealed the profound emotional and psychological burden of this revelation. At the same time, the palace grappled with the delicate task of public communication. Every statement, every gesture, was scrutinized by an international audience, hungry for news yet unaware of the depth of private suffering behind the palace walls. The balance between transparency and privacy became a daily challenge. How much could be shared without inviting undue speculation? How much secrecy was necessary to protect the dignity of the family while acknowledging a reality that could no longer be entirely concealed? These questions dominated every planning session, every briefing, and every decision, highlighting the unique challenges of modern monarchy in an era of instantaneous communication and relentless media attention. The emotional resonance of this situation extended beyond the immediate family. For decades, the British public had watched King Charles navigate the complexities of royal life with a blend of duty, intellect, and cautious diplomacy. For many, he had become a symbol of continuity, a figure whose life exemplified the enduring nature of the monarchy itself. Now, the stark reality of his illness disrupted not only the private dynamics of the family, but also the public perception of stability and strength. Citizens who had followed his career with admiration and interest were confronted with the vulnerability of a man who, until now, had been considered almost untouchable in his role. The realization that even the most powerful and public of figures are not immune to the limitations of the human condition added a layer of collective emotional resonance to the unfolding story. In those quiet moments within the palace, the family's grief was compounded by practical considerations. Arrangements for succession, estate management, and the ongoing responsibilities of the monarchy could not be ignored, even as emotions ran high. Documents, schedules, and contingency plans were reviewed and revised with meticulous care, yet none of these preparations could shield the family from the emotional toll of knowing that time was limited. Every conversation carried weight, every decision was fraught with consequence, and every glance across a room conveyed the unspoken understanding that the days ahead would demand both extraordinary composure and extraordinary courage. Even the smallest details became emotionally charged. The choice of a particular room for private family discussions, the timing of meals, the careful coordination of appearances, all were influenced by the delicate balance between maintaining normalcy and acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Staff who had served the family for years now found themselves mediators, confidants, and witnesses to a private tragedy of historical significance. Their roles, once clearly defined, had expanded to include emotional labor that was both complex and unrelenting, as they sought to support the family while maintaining the seamless public image of the monarchy. The contrast between private sorrow and public expectation created an almost theatrical tension. Every smile that King Charles offered during a public engagement, every measured word spoken in a formal address, carried the dual purpose of reassuring the public and concealing the profound reality of his condition. The family, too, navigated this delicate balance, performing roles that required both authenticity and restraint, emotional expression and controlled composure. The palace, often perceived as a symbol of permanence and continuity, was now revealed as a place of deeply human struggle, where the most powerful figures were nonetheless vulnerable to the inevitability of life's end. And yet, amidst the emotional turbulence, there was a profound sense of unity. The family, though faced with an unimaginable challenge, came together in moments of private connection, drawing strength from shared history, mutual love, and the understanding that the days ahead would test not just their resilience, but the very bonds that held them together. Conversations that might have seemed mundane in another context became pivotal, every word infused with meaning, every gesture a reminder of shared commitment and deep familial connection. It was in these moments, behind closed doors and away from the public gaze, that the true heart of the royal family was revealed, not as a symbol of unassailable authority, but as a unit bound by love, loyalty, and shared humanity. The palace, often viewed as a stage for ceremonial display, had become a crucible of emotion, a place where the stark reality of mortality confronted centuries of tradition and expectation. Every member of the family, every aide, and every advisor was acutely aware that the coming months would define not only the legacy of King Charles, but also the future of the monarchy itself. Decisions made in these quiet, tense hours would ripple outward, shaping public perception, influencing historical narrative, and leaving an indelible mark on the family and the nation. It was a moment where the personal intersected with the historical, where human vulnerability collided with institutional responsibility, and where every choice carried weight beyond imagination. The unfolding story was not simply about illness or succession. It was about the intimate, raw experience of a family confronting one of life's ultimate challenges. It was about love and duty, fear and courage, grief and preparation. It was about the extraordinary burden placed upon ordinary human hearts when bound by history, expectation, and public scrutiny. And it was about the delicate navigation of private pain in a world that watches, analyzes, and reacts with relentless intensity. For King Charles, Prince William, Princess Anne, and Catherine, the days ahead were uncharted territory, a journey into both emotional depth and historical significance that would forever change their lives and the perception of monarchy in the eyes of the world. The morning the news officially reached the senior members of the royal family began like any other, with the soft clatter of breakfast dishes and the quiet rustle of newspapers being unfolded. But the tranquility was shattered the moment the chief royal physician, accompanied by a discreet aide, entered the room with a gravity that immediately silenced the chatter. King Charles had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. The words themselves, clinical in nature, felt like a thunderclap in the vast halls of the palace. No one spoke at first. The air seemed to thicken, as though time itself had paused to allow the enormity of the revelation to sink in. Prince William was the first to break the silence, his hand gripping the edge of the breakfast table until the knuckles turned white. 1,000 questions bombarded his mind, each more urgent than the last. What did this mean for his father's remaining months? How should he prepare his children, who were blissfully unaware of the private storm brewing behind the gilded palace walls? And what of his own future, of the throne he had always known he would eventually inherit, now looming closer with terrifying immediacy? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him with such intensity that he struggled to maintain composure. His breaths came shallow, as if each one carried the burden of both grief and inevitability. Princess Anne, ever the composed and pragmatic presence, absorbed the information with a studied calm, but those who knew her well could detect the tremor in her hands and the subtle tightness around her eyes. She had spent her life managing crises, both public and private, yet this was a confrontation with a reality no amount of experience could entirely soften. She asked measured, precise questions, seeking clarity on prognosis, treatment options, and palliative care. Yet behind the questions, the emotional undercurrent was undeniable, a blend of fear, sorrow, and the pressing need to protect both her father and the family legacy he represented. Catherine, who had recently celebrated milestones both personal and public, found herself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Her mind raced through the logistical and emotional implications. How to support her husband, how to shield her children from premature fear, how to balance the public image of strength and resilience with private anguish. She felt the vulnerability of being relatively new to the inner workings of the royal hierarchy, yet intimately responsible for the well-being of the next generation. The palace, with its centuries of protocol, suddenly seemed more like a labyrinth of emotional landmines than a symbol of stability. The physician, having conveyed the medical facts with clinical precision, left the room, leaving the family to absorb the impact in silence. The hush that followed was profound, almost reverential, as each member processed the reality in their own way. It was as though the walls themselves, accustomed to the whispers of history and the pomp of ceremony, recognized the gravity of this intimate human crisis. The moment marked the beginning of an emotional journey that would demand every ounce of courage, patience, and resilience from the family. The immediate reactions varied. Prince William, usually measured and deliberate, paced the room, the creak of the wooden floor beneath his shoes echoing the disquiet in his mind. Each step was punctuated by a swirl of thoughts, the implications for national security, the succession plan, the emotional needs of his children, and, most deeply, the personal anguish of anticipating life without a father he admired and loved. His father, the king, had always been a figure of guidance and authority. Now, the man behind the crown was painfully human, vulnerable, and finite. Princess Anne, in contrast, retreated momentarily to a private corner of the room, clutching her hands together as she reflected on decades of family history, duty, and sacrifice. She considered not just her father's health, but the ripple effects across the monarchy and the nation. Every decision now carried heightened stakes, from public appearances to private engagements. The knowledge that the eyes of the world would soon scrutinize every gesture added a layer of complexity to every choice. Anne's mind moved swiftly, cataloging options, assessing risks, and mentally preparing for both the personal and institutional consequences. Catherine's reaction was equally layered, her mind balancing empathy with pragmatism. She considered the emotional needs of her young children, the timing of any public statements, and the support her husband would require in navigating both familial grief and institutional responsibility. Each scenario she envisioned was fraught with challenges, a delicate interplay of emotion and duty. She felt the invisible pressure of centuries of precedent, aware that her responses, like those of her siblings-in-law, would be closely observed and judged by a global audience. The family gathered shortly after, convening in a private salon where sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the ornate furnishings and rich tapestries that had witnessed generations of royal deliberations. Yet even in this familiar space, the atmosphere was tense, almost electric, charged with unspoken fears and anticipatory grief. Discussions unfolded with a mix of urgency and restraint. The family weighed options for immediate care, public disclosure, and personal moments with the king. Each suggestion, each consideration, was infused with layers of emotion, love, duty, anxiety, and the weight of historical responsibility. Behind closed doors, aides and advisors worked frantically to draft contingency plans, ensuring the continuity of royal functions, public appearances, and international obligations. Every aspect of the monarchy's operations, from ceremonial duties to charitable initiatives, required reevaluation. The challenge was not simply logistical. It was profoundly human. The staff navigated a delicate balance between offering support, managing information, and preserving dignity. They were witnesses to a moment in history where the private vulnerability of a monarch intersected with the public expectation of strength and endurance. As the hours passed, the family's responses evolved. Initial shock gave way to strategic planning, emotional reflection, and quiet conversations that revealed the deep interconnections of love, loyalty, and responsibility. Prince William sought solace in private dialogue with his father, seeking reassurance and shared understanding even as the reality of mortality loomed. Princess Anne engaged in detailed discussions with medical professionals and advisors, her mind a bridge between practical necessity and emotional stewardship. Catherine balanced her attentions between her husband, her children, and the subtle nuances of managing both personal grief and public perception. The day closed with a mixture of exhaustion, emotional weight, and tentative acceptance. The palace, a centuries-old bastion of tradition and ceremonial continuity, had witnessed a deeply human story unfold, one of vulnerability, courage, and profound love. The family's journey had only begun, and the days ahead promised challenges that would test their resilience, unity, and emotional strength in unprecedented ways. Yet even amidst the uncertainty, there were moments of connection, silent support, and the quiet reassurance that, despite the enormity of what lay ahead, they faced it together, bound by blood, duty, and unwavering devotion. The moment the official confirmation of King Charles's terminal illness reached the inner circle, the emotions within the royal household surged with an intensity that words alone could scarcely capture. In the quiet of the morning, away from the prying eyes of the media and the public, Prince William, Princess Anne, and Catherine were left to confront a reality that none of them had truly anticipated. The weight of mortality, so often discussed in hushed tones behind palace walls, now confronted them directly, unyielding and unambiguous. Prince William, the heir apparent, found himself overcome by a torrent of conflicting feelings. Anger, sorrow, fear, and disbelief collided inside him like waves against the cliffs of his composure. He sat in the private sitting room, staring at a family photograph, his hand trembling slightly as it hovered over the frame. In that photograph, he saw his father, robust, commanding, a pillar of guidance and authority. The man in the photograph seemed untouchable, immortal even. Yet reality now imposed its cruel logic, reminding William that no title, no crown, and no public expectation could shield them from the inevitability of loss. His normally steady voice faltered as he whispered to himself, asking questions that had no immediate answers. How much time did they truly have left? How should he prepare his children? How could he process his own grief while maintaining the image of strength expected by the nation? Princess, and ever the poised and disciplined member of the royal family, allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. She retreated to the privacy of a smaller chamber, away from the collective gaze, and let the tears fall freely. Each drop represented years of unspoken concern, decades of witnessing her father carry immense responsibility, and now the painful acknowledgement that his time was tragically finite. She thought back on countless occasions where her father had been the source of stability for the family, for the monarchy, and for the country. Now, that source of strength needed her support, and the realization ignited a complex mix of sorrow and resolve within her. Anne's thoughts were interrupted only by the quiet presence of aides who offered silent support, understanding that sometimes words are inadequate in the face of such monumental news. Catherine's reaction was equally profound, yet tinged with a subtle blend of anxiety and practicality. Her maternal instincts surged, compelling her to consider not only the immediate emotional needs of her family, but also the long-term implications for her children. How would George, Charlotte, and Louis understand this looming absence? How could she shield them from premature fear while remaining truthful and authentic? These questions created a whirlwind in her mind, leaving her both emotionally raw and hyper-aware of every word, every gesture. Catherine moved quietly around the palace, her steps deliberate yet thoughtful, engaging with staff and advisors to begin a delicate planning process even as she wrestled with her private grief. The siblings and Catherine eventually gathered in a more formal setting, a room designed for both comfort and diplomacy, where they could collectively process the enormity of the situation. The initial silence was almost deafening, each person caught in the grip of their own inner turmoil. Then, as if on an unspoken cue, the emotions began to surface. Tears were shed, voices wavered, and the carefully maintained composure of decades gave way to a profoundly human response. The room resonated with quiet sobs, whispered reassurances, and shared reflections that illuminated the depth of their connection. During this moment of private vulnerability, candid conversations began to unfold. Prince William expressed not just grief, but also a sense of responsibility, articulating the challenges of balancing his personal anguish with the expectations of the monarchy and the public. His words were measured yet tinged with raw emotion, revealing the immense pressure of his dual role as both son and future king. Princess Anne offered insights and recollections, drawing on her experience in managing public and private crises, while Catherine provided an empathetic perspective, ensuring that the family's younger generation and household staff were considered in every decision. Beyond the immediate family, aides and advisors were working tirelessly behind the scenes, preparing for the eventual public disclosure and coordinating with medical professionals to ensure that the king's care remained discreet, dignified, and effective. Every decision was laden with complexity: how to balance transparency with privacy, how to manage international relations and public perception, and how to protect the family from potential media exploitation. The logistical demands were immense, yet the emotional labor, navigating fear, grief, and the human need for connection, was arguably even greater. In private conversations, fears that had been dormant for years suddenly emerged. William worried not only for his father's remaining time, but also for the immediate future of the monarchy, and contemplated the fragility of life and the pressures that would now intensify for each family member. Catherine reflected on the emotional impact on her children, her husband, and herself, considering the delicate task of modeling both strength and vulnerability. They all recognized that while the palace walls had shielded them from public scrutiny for generations, no structure, however grand, could insulate them from the human experience of loss. The gravity of the moment was compounded by the awareness that the outside world remained unaware of the private storm raging within Buckingham Palace. The royals had long managed public perception with a careful blend of tradition, protocol, and strategic communication. Now, they were faced with the extraordinary challenge of preserving dignity, managing grief, and controlling the narrative, knowing that, inevitably, the news would become public and spark global attention, speculation, and emotional reactions across the world. As the day wore on, the family's collective response began to crystallize. Decisions were made about private moments with the king, conversations with medical teams, and the initial groundwork for eventual public acknowledgement. Within these arrangements, moments of tenderness emerged, shared glances, reassuring touches, and whispered affirmations that, despite the looming shadow of illness, they remained united. These small acts of solidarity, often imperceptible to outsiders, formed the emotional backbone of their collective resilience. Evening approached, and with it, a reflective quiet descended over the palace. The family, physically together yet emotionally absorbed in their private contemplation, began to navigate the first stage of a journey that would test them in every conceivable way. The weight of grief, the immediacy of mortality, and the responsibility to both the king and the monarchy intertwined into a complex tapestry of emotion, strategy, and human connection. It was a moment that, while private, would inevitably define their experience of both family and duty in the weeks and months to come. By the end of the first day following the revelation, a subtle yet profound shift had occurred. Shock had begun to give way to an understanding of the road ahead, tempered by emotional rawness and profound concern. Prince William, Princess Anne, and Catherine each confronted the fragility of life in a manner that was intensely personal, yet intrinsically linked to the legacy of the monarchy. The palace, for all its centuries of ceremony and protocol, had become a place of human vulnerability, a stage upon which the timeless drama of love, fear, and familial loyalty would play out against the ticking clock of an unforgiving prognosis. As the evening shadows stretched across Buckingham Palace, a sense of foreboding settled over the family. Earlier that day, the news of King Charles's terminal illness had already sent ripples of shock and sorrow through the inner circle, but what was yet to come from the medical experts would deepen the gravity of the situation beyond anything the royals had anticipated. The king's lead physician, a man of both immense expertise and discretion, had requested a private meeting with Prince William, Princess Anne, Catherine, and select advisors. In the grand yet understated consultation room, the atmosphere was heavy with anticipation. The air itself seemed to carry the weight of unsaid truths, each person present acutely aware that the conversation they were about to have could alter the course of their lives forever. Dr. Montgomery, the physician who had overseen the king's health for the past decade, began with the necessary formalities, protocol, reassurances, and medical precision, but quickly moved into the heart of the matter. He explained that King Charles's condition had progressed more rapidly than previously expected, with diagnostic tests indicating that he had only a few months left. The term terminal hung in the room like a palpable presence, neither exaggerated nor softened, and the gravity of its meaning was impossible to ignore. William's reaction was immediate, a mixture of disbelief and deep concern. He asked question after question, attempting to reconcile the precise medical terminology with the personal reality of losing a father and monarch simultaneously. How could this happen so quickly? Were there any alternative treatments or experimental options? What could be done to extend his father's life, even marginally? Each query was met with factual, clear answers, but none could alleviate the emotional weight that pressed upon him. Princess Anne, known for her pragmatism and poise, absorbed the information with a quiet intensity. Her mind immediately began assessing the broader implications, not just for her father's comfort and care, but also for the stability of the monarchy, the management of public communications, and the safeguarding of her family's privacy. Anne's questions were precise, seeking clarity on care protocols, medication schedules, and the potential for pain management, reflecting both her concern for her father and her disciplined approach to crisis management. Catherine's response was layered with emotion and instinct. She considered not only the immediate implications for the king, but also the psychological impact on her children and the extended family. She inquired about ways to support the king's mental and emotional well-being, seeking advice on how to prepare her family for the delicate balance of hope and acceptance. Catherine's questions demonstrated a profound understanding that care extended beyond the physical. It encompassed every facet of human experience, from fear to dignity to legacy. Dr. Montgomery, understanding the delicate interplay between medical facts and emotional reception, carefully outlined what the coming months would entail. The king's energy would inevitably fluctuate, sometimes dramatically, and the family would need to prepare for both moments of clarity and periods of fatigue or discomfort. He emphasized the importance of creating an environment that balanced privacy, routine, and comfort, ensuring that the king could maintain as much agency and dignity as possible. Every recommendation was underscored by a recognition that time was precious and increasingly limited. The conversation soon shifted to practical matters. How would the king's daily routine adapt to his condition? Which engagements, ceremonies, and public appearances could he safely attend, and which should be postponed or delegated? How could the family manage the palace staff, security protocols, and media scrutiny while respecting the king's remaining autonomy? Each decision carried weight not only for the king's well-being, but also for the perception of the monarchy by the public and the world. As the discussion unfolded, the family began to grasp the full magnitude of what lay ahead. This was not merely a health crisis. It was a confrontation with mortality, public perception, and the enduring legacy of the crown. The advisors and aides present took meticulous notes, ready to implement the necessary adjustments with precision, but the emotional resonance of the news could not be documented in any report or plan. The human element, the fear, the grief, the love, was irreplaceable and demanded attention in its own right. Dr. Montgomery also highlighted the necessity of discreet communication with other key members of the royal family, including those who were not present. It was crucial to prepare them emotionally while maintaining a level of secrecy sufficient to manage public reaction. The delicate balance of privacy and transparency would require careful orchestration, and the family knew that missteps could have consequences both personal and political. Even as the medical realities settled in, the room was filled with a sense of resolve. The family understood that, while the prognosis was grave, their response could shape the remaining months for the king, creating moments of comfort, dignity, and shared connection. The conversation, though grim, inspired a subtle determination to navigate this terminal chapter with grace, foresight, and emotional strength, despite the heartbreak that loomed. By the time the consultation concluded, each family member carried with them a burden and a responsibility that could not be shared with the public or the world at large. Prince William would shoulder the anticipation of succession, balancing duty with personal grief. Princess Anne would coordinate the practical and emotional care, ensuring that both protocol and compassion guided every decision. Catherine would prepare her children and household for the reality of their grandfather's condition, guiding them with empathy and insight. That night, as the palace settled into an uneasy quiet, the weight of Dr. Montgomery's words lingered. The stark reality of the king's limited time had transformed abstract concern into urgent, visceral awareness. The family's private world had shifted irrevocably, and every thought, every plan, and every conversation would now be filtered through the lens of this terminal revelation. As the first full day of processing the king's diagnosis gave way to night, Buckingham Palace became a silent theater of private, unspoken exchanges. Beyond the public eye, the corridors once echoing with formalities and ceremonial steps now carried whispers, hurried footsteps, and the hushed confessions of those grappling with grief, fear, and the unbearable weight of mortality. The family had retreated into pockets of privacy, yet the palace itself seemed to absorb their emotions, every ornate wall bearing witness to a historic and profoundly human moment. Prince William, still reeling from the doctor's words, found himself wandering the quieter wings of the palace. His mind raced, recalling every conversation he had ever had with his father, replaying moments of guidance, discipline, and unexpected humor. These recollections, bittersweet in their immediacy, were suddenly tinged with the haunting realization that those moments were finite. He paused by a window overlooking the palace gardens, the night air carrying the faint chill of early autumn. The silence was a stark contrast to the internal storm he was experiencing. He whispered to himself, more to steady his own thoughts than to communicate with anyone, asking questions he could not answer aloud. How do I honor his life while preparing for his absence? How do I remain strong for my children, for my mother, for the nation? Meanwhile, Princess Anne had convened a discreet meeting with senior palace aides. Her tone, measured yet firm, reflected both the urgency of the moment and the weight of responsibility she carried. She instructed that all communications regarding the king's condition remain tightly controlled, emphasizing that the family's private grief must not be exploited or sensationalized by the media. Anne's attention to detail was meticulous. She anticipated every possible scenario, from the intrusion of paparazzi into the palace grounds to the spread of speculative narratives that could overshadow the human reality of her father's illness. Her command over these details was a form of protection, not just for the king, but for the entire family. Catherine, guided by both empathy and instinct, initiated private conversations with those closest to the king, trusted aides, household staff, and family members who had long shared in the intimate rhythms of royal life. Her approach was gentle but unflinching. She sought not to shield them from the truth, but to frame it in a way that acknowledged grief while fostering resilience. She reminded them of the importance of presence, of listening, of small gestures that could sustain the king's dignity and comfort. In these moments, she revealed a depth of emotional intelligence that resonated powerfully with those around her. The conversations were not limited to logistical matters. Emotional confessions emerged spontaneously, often in the quietest corners of the palace. William, Anne, and Catherine shared memories, regrets, and hopes with one another, some spoken aloud, others simply exchanged through meaningful glances or subtle touches. William recounted childhood moments of vulnerability he had rarely admitted to anyone. The quiet evenings when his father would explain the weight of duty, the stern yet loving words that shaped his understanding of responsibility, and the rare occasions when his father had allowed him to see fear or uncertainty behind the regal composure. These revelations were not mere nostalgia. They were attempts to connect, to understand, and to prepare emotionally for the inevitable transition that loomed. And, in her own reflective space, admitted to vulnerabilities that had long been suppressed. She spoke of the fear that had followed her throughout her life. Fear not of public scrutiny, but of losing the anchor of her family. She confessed to moments of quiet panic when considering the possibility of navigating the monarchy without her father's guidance, acknowledging the delicate balance between personal emotion and public duty. Her candidness inspired a rare intimacy among the family members, breaking down barriers that decades of protocol had maintained. Catherine's confessions took on a maternal dimension. She shared anxieties about her children, about how they would perceive the sudden fragility of a figure they had known as nearly invincible. She discussed strategies for age-appropriate honesty, for nurturing emotional resilience, and for providing reassurance without resorting to falsehoods. Her insights, drawn from lived experience and maternal instinct, became a source of grounding for William and Anne, illustrating the power of empathy and foresight amidst uncertainty. These whispered conversations extended beyond the immediate family. Trusted aides, privy to decades of royal history and intimately familiar with the king's preferences, contributed insights that were both practical and profoundly personal. They recounted moments when the king had shown vulnerability, times when he had confided in them about fears, regrets, and aspirations. These recollections provided a fuller picture of the man behind the crown, a human being navigating the complexities of mortality, responsibility, and legacy. As the night deepened, the emotional fabric of the palace became densely woven with the threads of reflection, fear, hope, and intimate honesty. The family began to realize that the days ahead would demand both emotional fortitude and strategic thinking. Each private confession, each whispered secret, was not simply an expression of grief. It was a step toward preparing for the multifaceted challenges that the king's terminal diagnosis would bring. Despite the sorrow, there were also moments of levity and warmth. Anecdotes from earlier in the king's life, humorous recollections of ceremonial mishaps, and shared memories of personal triumphs provided brief but meaningful reprieves from the pervasive heaviness. These moments reinforced the resilience of the family, demonstrating that even amidst the looming shadow of illness, human connection, humor, and love remained vital. By the early hours of the morning, the hidden conversations had established a foundation of collective understanding. The family was emotionally aligned, having acknowledged the harsh realities while simultaneously identifying ways to sustain dignity, presence, and support for the king. The palace, once a symbol of unyielding tradition, had become a sanctuary of honesty, intimacy, and unspoken solidarity, a space where vulnerability was not weakness, but a vital tool for navigating the coming months. Through these conversations, a realization took hold. This period of terminal illness was not simply a countdown to loss, but an opportunity for profound human connection, for legacy building, and for embracing the complexity of life in its most raw and authentic form. The family, while profoundly affected by grief, began to recognize that their collective strength, compassion, and presence could transform the king's remaining time into moments of meaning, reflection, and enduring love. The news of King Charles's terminal illness did not only send shockwaves through the immediate royal family, it reverberated throughout the entire household staff. From butlers and maids to senior advisors and personal aides, each person intimately involved in the daily functioning of Buckingham Palace was suddenly thrust into a reality that was both unsettling and unprecedented. The palace, a fortress of tradition, discipline, and unspoken hierarchies, had become a crucible of emotion, secrecy, and urgent adaptation. At dawn, the palace corridors, which typically hummed with quiet order, felt charged with a palpable tension. Staff members who had spent decades serving the monarchy were suddenly faced with the stark human truth behind the public facade. The king, a figure of authority and resilience, was now vulnerable, mortal, and in need of care. The realization unsettled even the most seasoned personnel, forcing them to reconcile years of protocol with a deeply human response to impending loss. Head butler Sir Reginald Pembroke, a man whose presence had been a stabilizing force for decades, summoned the senior household staff for an urgent briefing. The gathering was solemn. The weight of their responsibility was immediately apparent. Sir Reginald's voice, usually measured and calm, carried an unmistakable edge of urgency. He emphasized that discretion was paramount, stressing that the media must not be allowed to exploit the situation. Rumors, even the faintest whispers, could jeopardize both the king's dignity and the operational integrity of the palace. But beyond protocol, the staff were grappling with personal emotions. Many had formed close, almost familial bonds with the king over years of service. Some had witnessed intimate moments of levity, quiet contemplation, or unspoken vulnerability. To reconcile these memories with the cold reality of the terminal diagnosis was a challenge few had anticipated. Their grief was personal, yet it had to be expressed through a lens of professional restraint, a balancing act that demanded constant emotional vigilance. The personal aides, responsible for the king's daily schedule, began reconfiguring routines. Medical appointments, ceremonial duties, and public engagements were reviewed, postponed, or delegated, often at the last minute. This logistical reshuffling created a ripple effect throughout the palace, forcing staff to adapt rapidly while maintaining appearances of seamless continuity. Each change, though meticulously planned, carried with it the subtle tension of secrecy. Every adjustment had to be executed without raising suspicion outside the inner circle. Housekeepers and support staff faced an emotional and physical toll. They were tasked with maintaining the impeccable standards of the palace while navigating an environment charged with sorrow, uncertainty, and quiet panic. For some, the pressure manifested as sleepless nights, nervous anticipation, and an acute awareness that any misstep could impact both the king and the wider royal family. The weight of these responsibilities, previously routine, now felt monumental, layering grief atop decades of disciplined service. Security personnel experienced a heightened sense of urgency as well. The king's vulnerability necessitated enhanced protective measures, not only for physical safety, but also to prevent breaches of privacy during a period when personal health information was exceptionally sensitive. Coordination with medical staff, advisors, and close family members became critical, and even the smallest lapse in vigilance was considered unacceptable. The security team found themselves navigating a delicate balance, safeguarding the king's privacy while remaining fully prepared for any unforeseen emergencies. Even the chefs, gardeners, and other seemingly peripheral staff felt the shift in the palace's atmosphere. Conversations once casual or perfunctory were now steeped in subtle concern, hushed speculation, and a shared understanding of the gravity of the moment. Simple acts of service, a prepared meal, a meticulously trimmed hedge, a quiet clearing of the dining table, became acts of emotional support, tangible contributions to a household grappling with fragility. Amidst the chaos, alliances and confidences formed. Certain staff members became the emotional anchors for one another, offering solace, advice, and shared strength. Long-standing hierarchies softened as the shared human experience of impending loss bridged formal divisions. Trust and loyalty, already the foundation of palace life, were reinforced, creating a network of quiet resilience that would prove essential in the coming months. Yet, not all reactions were measured. Some staff members struggled with their emotions in ways that disrupted routines. Tears shed in private corridors, whispered conversations overheard, and moments of hesitation or distraction were inevitable. These human responses, while natural, demanded careful management to prevent exposure of the king's condition to the outside world. Senior staff, particularly Sir Reginald, found themselves balancing empathy with enforcement, guiding their teams with a steady hand while acknowledging the deeply personal nature of their collective grief. The ripple effect extended beyond the palace walls. Trusted advisors, liaising with external agencies, family members abroad, and the media, worked tirelessly to craft a narrative that balanced transparency with discretion. Every press release, every public statement, and every subtle indication of the king's health had to be carefully calibrated. Any misstep could trigger speculation, sensationalism, or public panic. The staff understood that their actions, though largely unseen by the public, were critical in preserving the dignity and stability of the monarchy during a period of profound vulnerability. In quiet moments, many staff members reflected on the king's personal qualities, the rare moments of humor, humility, and warmth that had made him more than a figurehead. They considered how to honor his legacy through their service, how to maintain the integrity of the household while supporting the family emotionally, and how to navigate the intersection of personal grief and professional duty. These reflections, while often private, were powerful motivators, instilling a sense of purpose amidst the uncertainty and sorrow that had permeated the palace. By the end of the day, the royal household had begun to settle into a fragile rhythm. The initial shock of the diagnosis had given way to structured routines, carefully coordinated care, and a network of emotional support that allowed the palace to function despite the profound personal impact on every individual. There was no relief from the reality of the king's condition, but there was a shared commitment to navigate the coming months with professionalism, compassion, and unyielding loyalty. The hidden conversations, unspoken fears, and careful orchestration of palace life during this crisis painted a vivid picture of the human side of monarchy. Behind the grandeur, tradition, and public expectations, the king's household revealed the intricate interplay of loyalty, grief, and resilience. Each staff member, from the most senior aide to the newest recruit, had a role to play in sustaining the king's dignity, supporting the family, and preserving the legacy of the crown. In these early days, as Buckingham Palace adjusted to the new reality, it became evident that the coming months would test every aspect of life within the royal household. Emotional fortitude, professional discipline, and human compassion would all be called upon in ways previously unimaginable. And in this delicate balance, the true strength of the monarchy, rooted not only in tradition, but in the collective devotion of those who served, would be revealed. The announcement of King Charles's terminal illness did not just send shockwaves through the palace staff. It struck at the very core of the royal family. For Prince William, Princess Anne, and Princess Catherine, the news was nothing short of devastating. shattering the sense of stability they had always relied upon. Each reacted in deeply personal, intensely human ways, their public personas stripped away, leaving only raw emotion in its wake. Prince William, often perceived as the stoic heir, found himself unprepared for the emotional avalanche that followed. In the quiet of his private quarters, he replayed memories of his father, the long walks through the palace gardens, the lessons on duty and resilience, the rare moments of laughter during family gatherings. Each recollection brought with it a wave of sorrow so profound that he struggled to maintain composure. He was not just grappling with the impending loss of his father, but also the weight of responsibility that would soon be thrust upon him. In the days following the announcement, William was reportedly seen pacing the corridors, phone in hand, calling advisors, doctors, and family members. The urgency in his voice betrayed his inner turmoil, a stark contrast to the public calm he had maintained throughout his life. Princess Anne, long known for her resilience and sharp intellect, displayed a different kind of heartbreak. She approached the situation with meticulous preparation, determined to maintain order amidst chaos. Yet even her careful demeanor could not mask the tears that welled up during moments of solitude. Witnesses close to the princess described her as moving through the palace with a heavy heart, offering words of comfort to both staff and family members, even as her own grief threatened to overwhelm her. Anne's response was a mixture of stoic duty and genuine human vulnerability, a balancing act she had mastered over decades of public service, but never in the face of such intimate personal loss. Princess Catherine, often seen as the embodiment of grace and composure, experienced a heartbreak laced with quiet anguish. Her connection to King Charles had been one of mutual respect and warmth, and the thought of losing him left her in a state of silent despair. Behind the poised smiles and public appearances, she was privately navigating an emotional landscape filled with fear, sadness, and anxiety. Her days became a careful choreography of attending to her children, managing her public duties, and offering support to the wider family, all while containing the flood of emotions that threatened to spill over at any moment. Close aides noted that Catherine often retreated to private rooms, sitting alone for long stretches, a silent witness to her own heartbreak. The dynamic between the three siblings shifted in profound ways as they faced this shared crisis. Historically, there had been the usual mix of familial rivalry, differing perspectives on royal duty, and moments of tension that typify any family, royal or not. Now, however, a sense of unity emerged, forged by the shared weight of impending loss. Late-night conversations behind closed doors, whispered plans for managing public appearances, and collaborative efforts to ensure their father's comfort revealed a new layer of familial cohesion. It was a unity born not of ceremony or obligation, but of necessity and deep emotional connection. The public, unaware of the full scope of the king's condition, would never see these private moments. In public appearances, William, Anne, and Catherine maintained the polished, composed facades expected of them, but insiders noted subtle cracks. A quiver in William's voice during a briefing, a tear caught and quickly brushed away by, and during a discussion with aides, the fleeting sadness in Catherine's eyes during ceremonial duties. Each micro-expression told a story of grief and love intertwined, a silent testament to the emotional turmoil that remained hidden from the world. Conversations within the palace walls often turned to difficult questions about the future. Who would assume critical responsibilities in the coming months? How would public perception be managed? What would become of the numerous charitable commitments and royal engagements already scheduled? These practical concerns were compounded by an emotional urgency. The siblings were keenly aware that their father's time was limited, and every decision carried the weight of immediate consequence and long-term legacy. In addition to internal family dynamics, the siblings had to manage the expectations of the broader royal circle. Cousins, distant relatives, and key advisors all had their own concerns, fears, and agendas. Navigating these relationships required diplomacy, patience, and constant vigilance, all while maintaining personal composure. The pressure was immense, and yet the trio moved with a quiet determination, aware that their father's dignity and comfort depended on their ability to act with calm, clarity, and emotional intelligence. Memories of the past became both a source of solace and pain. Prince William recalled fishing trips with his father, moments of playful banter that now seemed achingly distant. Princess Anne thought of late-night strategy sessions and lessons in statecraft, each memory a reminder of what was at stake. Princess Catherine reflected on shared family meals, casual conversations, and the rare moments when the king allowed himself to relax and simply be a father. Each recollection deepened the sense of loss already encroaching on their daily lives, reinforcing the reality that time was slipping away far too quickly. Despite the sadness, moments of levity emerged, often unexpectedly. A shared joke during a briefing, a quiet acknowledgement of a fond memory, or a small gesture of support among the siblings provided brief, precious relief from the overarching tension. These moments, though fleeting, highlighted the resilience and humanity of the royal family, offering glimpses of their ability to find strength even in the darkest circumstances. The ripple effects of the king's illness extended beyond immediate grief. Decisions about public announcements, ceremonial adjustments, and the timing of engagements became complex calculations. Each sibling played a critical role in these determinations, balancing emotional needs with strategic considerations. The weight of these decisions underscored the delicate interplay between personal loss and public responsibility, revealing a side of monarchy rarely seen outside the palace walls. In quiet reflection, Prince William, Princess Anne, and Princess Catherine each confronted their own mortality, the fragility of life, and the inevitability of change. Their father's illness served as a stark reminder that even the most powerful figures are subject to the same vulnerabilities as those they serve. It was a humbling realization, one that deepened their empathy, strengthened their familial bonds, and, paradoxically, reinforced their sense of duty. As days turned into weeks, the siblings adapted to a new rhythm, one dictated by care, presence, and emotional vigilance. They learned to navigate public appearances with poise, manage private grief with discretion, and support one another in ways that transcended ceremony and protocol. This chapter of their lives, though steeped in sorrow, became a testament to resilience, unity, and the enduring strength of familial love in the face of unimaginable adversity. Through the heartbreak, moments of clarity emerged. The siblings recognized the importance of being present, of cherishing the time remaining with their father, and of making choices that would honor his legacy. The emotional gravity of their situation was undeniable, yet it became the catalyst for growth, reflection, and a deepened understanding of the impermanence that defines human existence, even for those born into privilege and power. The news of King Charles's terminal illness did not remain confined to the inner circle of the royal family. Once the private doctors, close aides, and household staff were informed, a wave of shock, anxiety, and deep concern swept through the palace. For decades, the staff had devoted their lives to the royal household, forming bonds with the family that went beyond duty, often straddling the line between personal loyalty and professional responsibility. Now, with the revelation that their sovereign's days were limited, these dynamics were being tested like never before. The butlers, housekeepers, and private secretaries found themselves caught between discretion and moral responsibility. The weight of secrecy was immense. Rumors could easily escape through a careless word, a misinterpreted glance, or an unguarded conversation in the palace corridors. The staff, trained in confidentiality and bound by loyalty, now carried an even heavier burden. The knowledge that any slip could not only cause a media storm, but also deeply impact the family they served. Tension permeated every corner of the palace. Even routine tasks, serving tea, preparing chambers, managing appointments, felt amplified by the omnipresent shadow of the king's illness. Senior aides held emergency meetings in hushed tones, discussing the implications of the announcement. The questions were relentless. Who could be trusted with the information? How should rumors among extended staff be managed? And when would it be appropriate to inform other palace workers without breaking protocol? Every decision required careful calculation. The palace operates like a finely tuned machine, and any disruption, especially one of this magnitude, risked exposing cracks in the structure. The senior aides, long experienced in the subtle politics of royal life, now found themselves navigating uncharted territory, balancing empathy, discretion, and efficiency. Among the more junior staff, reactions ranged from disbelief to palpable anxiety. Many had grown up seeing the monarchy as unshakable, a symbol of enduring stability. To witness the king's vulnerability firsthand was both shocking and profoundly humanizing. Some whispered in corners, sharing fears about what the future would hold, while others remained silent, unsure how to process the news or how to express their emotions appropriately. The palace, known for its polished facade, became a place where whispered worries and subtle glances conveyed volumes. The kitchens, usually buzzing with the rhythm of meal preparation and ceremonial planning, became a microcosm of the palace's tension. Head chefs and kitchen staff exchanged worried glances as they prepared dishes for upcoming engagements, the knowledge of the king's health pressing on their minds. How do you cook when the man you serve might not be here for much longer? One senior chef reportedly muttered under his breath. Behind closed doors, some staff quietly cried, their emotions spilling over in moments they believed were unseen. Others channeled their anxiety into meticulous preparation, focusing on work as a coping mechanism to regain some sense of control in a situation that felt profoundly uncontrollable. Security staff faced their own complex challenges. Not only were they tasked with ensuring the physical safety of a monarch whose condition now required more medical oversight, but they also had to navigate the emotional dynamics of a palace in crisis. Some guards were said to be exceptionally close to the royal family, having served multiple generations, and their loyalty was intensely personal. The revelation of the king's illness was a blow not only to their professional role, but also to their emotional equilibrium. Several were reportedly seen pausing in corridors, deep in thought, quietly adjusting their schedules to ensure both vigilance and discretion. One particularly tense area was the communication chain within the palace. Every message, phone call, or briefing carried the risk of misinterpretation. Staff members struggled with the delicate balance of honesty and discretion. How much could be said without breaching confidentiality? How should they respond if approached by media insiders or political operatives? These were not theoretical concerns. In the age of social media and instant news, even the slightest leak could ignite global attention. The staff became acutely aware that their actions, no matter how minor, had consequences that extended far beyond the palace walls. Adding to the stress were the medical professionals assigned to the king. Doctors and nurses were navigating not only the clinical reality of a terminal diagnosis, but also the palace's high expectations for privacy and decorum. Each interaction required careful judgment: how to deliver updates, how to manage medications, and how to coordinate with the family in ways that maintained both dignity and discretion. There were reports of late-night consultations, emergency briefings, and discreet monitoring sessions, all conducted under the veil of secrecy. Staff who witnessed these moments spoke of a palpable tension, the air heavy with the unspoken reality that time was limited. Some staff members found themselves grappling with moral dilemmas. Should they reach out to external contacts for guidance, risking potential breaches of protocol? Could they express their concern or grief without compromising professional obligations? The emotional toll was significant. Long-term palace employees, who often treated the family as an extended family themselves, were now confronted with the harsh reality of mortality within the walls they had long considered safe and unchanging. Amidst this turmoil, small acts of kindness and solidarity began to emerge. Staff members offered quiet reassurances to one another, shared moments of empathy during brief breaks, and assisted colleagues navigating emotionally challenging tasks. These gestures, though subtle, strengthened internal bonds and provided a sense of collective resilience. In the palace, where hierarchy often dictates interactions, these moments of human connection became essential lifelines, allowing the staff to endure the emotional strain of the king's condition. Rumors, of course, began to circulate, as they always do in environments of secrecy and high stakes. Unverified whispers about the king's condition, potential public announcements, and possible implications for succession began to spread cautiously among staff. Leadership responded swiftly, reminding everyone of the critical importance of discretion while addressing fears and questions with measured transparency. Despite these efforts, tension lingered like a shadow in the hallways, every staff member acutely aware that the next step, whether medical, procedural, or ceremonial, would have enormous consequences. This combination of loyalty, fear, and secrecy created a pressure cooker environment. Every gesture, every conversation, every step required careful thought. Staff members navigated the emotional landscape with professionalism, but behind the polished exterior, the anxiety and heartbreak were unmistakable. Many confided that they had never before experienced a situation where the weight of a single individual's illness could ripple so profoundly through an entire institution. The emotional stakes extended beyond the palace gates. Staff worried not only about the king's health, but also about the broader perception of the monarchy. A mismanaged announcement or leak could provoke public outrage, media frenzy, or international speculation, potentially undermining decades of careful reputation management. The responsibility was immense, and the weight of expectation compounded the emotional strain already felt. By the end of the first week following the announcement, it became clear that the staff's role would be critical in the coming months. Their ability to maintain composure, uphold discretion, and navigate the delicate interplay of duty and emotion would define the palace's response to the king's illness. Each member, from the most senior aide to the newest recruit, understood that their actions had profound consequences, both for the family they served and for the institution itself. Amidst the tension, whispers of unity and resilience began to emerge. Long-serving staff reflected on past crises, drawing upon collective experience to guide their responses. They reminded each other of the importance of professionalism, the value of loyalty, and the necessity of compassion for themselves, for one another, and for the royal family. In these moments, the human side of palace life became evident. Behind the grandeur, pomp, and ceremony, a network of deeply committed individuals worked tirelessly, often in silence, to uphold the dignity and well-being of those they served. The moment the palace officially released the statement confirming King Charles's terminal illness, the world seemed to stop. Headlines flashed across every major news outlet. King Charles diagnosed with terminal illness. Royal family faces unimaginable crisis. Monarchy in shock. The statement was brief, carefully worded, and intentionally restrained, reflecting both the gravity of the news and the centuries-old protocol of the monarchy. Yet, the simplicity of the announcement did nothing to temper the magnitude of the public reaction. Social media exploded with speculation, emotional responses, and an unprecedented wave of concern for the king. In the United Kingdom, citizens expressed a mix of disbelief, sorrow, and anxious curiosity. Pubs, cafes, and workplaces buzzed with conversation. People shared memories of King Charles's decades-long public service, his speeches on climate change, and his long-standing dedication to charitable causes. Some reflected on his early days as heir apparent, recalling the pomp and ceremony that often overshadowed personal struggles. Now, the public was confronted with a human vulnerability that no royal protocol could shield. The news made everyone pause, reminding them that even figures enshrined in tradition and ceremony are not immune to the realities of life and mortality. International reactions were equally intense. World leaders issued statements of support, expressing empathy for the royal family while acknowledging King Charles's impact on diplomacy and global initiatives. Embassies scrambled to send condolences or prepare formal messages, navigating the delicate balance of protocol and genuine concern. Analysts speculated on how this revelation would influence international relations, royal engagements, and global perceptions of the British monarchy. In every capital, from Washington to Paris, the news dominated headlines, prompting commentary on television, radio, and online platforms. Media outlets, especially tabloids, shifted into overdrive. Pundits dissected every angle of the story, analyzing what the announcement implied for succession, the future of the monarchy, and the personal lives of the royal family members. Commentators debated whether Prince William would immediately assume more public responsibilities, how Princess Anne would step in to support the king and the crown, and what the emotional toll would be on the queen consort and extended family. Rumors, both substantiated and speculative, proliferated rapidly, leaving journalists and citizens alike to sift through fact, conjecture, and sensationalism. Within hours, social media platforms were inundated with posts expressing empathy, grief, and even outrage. Hashtags related to King Charles trended worldwide, with millions of users sharing memories, concerns, and messages of support. Some posts celebrated his decades of charitable work and environmental advocacy, while others scrutinized past controversies, reflecting the polarized nature of public opinion. The speed and intensity of the response created a feedback loop. The palace was aware that every move, every update, and every statement would be magnified, dissected, and debated on a scale unprecedented even for modern royalty. The royal communications team faced immediate and intense pressure. They worked tirelessly to coordinate media responses, prepare speeches, and guide public messaging. Every word was carefully considered. Even a minor misstep could escalate into a global controversy. Advisors drafted statements for the public, outlining King Charles's condition with the necessary sensitivity while maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. They coordinated with medical professionals to ensure that any disclosures were accurate and consistent, balancing transparency with privacy. Meanwhile, social media monitoring teams tracked global sentiment, providing feedback to the communications team and helping anticipate emerging narratives. Public events were canceled or postponed in the wake of the announcement. Scheduled royal engagements, charity appearances, and official visits were re-evaluated in light of the king's health and the emotional state of the family. The ripple effect extended far beyond the palace, affecting staff schedules, international diplomacy, and media coverage. Each adjustment required careful planning, as officials balanced the need to respect the king's privacy with public expectations for leadership and visibility. The emotional impact on the public was palpable. People left flowers and messages outside Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and Windsor Castle. Many wrote personal letters expressing support and gratitude, often recounting how King Charles's work had touched their lives. These acts of devotion highlighted the deep connection between the monarchy and its citizens, even amid growing debates about relevance, tradition, and modernity. Psychologists and sociologists commented on the phenomenon, noting how collective grief can emerge in response to symbolic figures and national icons. Meanwhile, speculation about succession intensified. Conversations shifted from sympathy for the king to questions about who would lead the nation if his condition worsened rapidly. Analysts debated how Prince William would handle the increasing responsibilities, how Princess Anne might step into public and ceremonial roles, and what tensions might arise among other family members. The palace itself remained a tightly controlled environment, with security protocols, private consultations, and medical monitoring ensuring that internal operations continued uninterrupted, even as the outside world buzzed with speculation. Within this maelstrom, the royal family faced unprecedented scrutiny. Every gesture, expression, or statement was magnified under the global spotlight. Paparazzi intensified their surveillance, seeking images that might reveal the emotional state of Prince William, Princess Anne, and Catherine. Reports circulated about private moments captured discreetly, with tabloids attempting to interpret body language, interactions, and attire for clues about the family's response. The pressure to maintain composure, dignity, and unity while under public scrutiny became a daily struggle for the family. Psychological tolls became evident. Experts in grief and public life speculated on the challenges faced by the family, balancing personal loss with ceremonial duties. The king's health and the family's emotional response highlighted the delicate interplay between public duty and private suffering. Conversations emerged about how monarchy, by its very nature, demands an extraordinary level of stoicism while facing deeply human experiences. Despite the intense media frenzy, pockets of the public expressed profound empathy, sharing stories of personal connection, admiration, and respect for King Charles. These responses underscored the enduring power of the monarchy to evoke emotional investment and personal resonance. Citizens debated not only the implications for the crown but also the human dimension of the news, recognizing the king as a person, a father, and a leader confronting mortality. In parallel, discussions about succession planning intensified among advisors and legal experts. Contingency plans, emergency protocols, and ceremonial considerations were reviewed and updated. The palace staff worked around the clock, ensuring that all logistical, ceremonial, and security measures were in place. The combination of emotional strain, public scrutiny, and operational complexity created an environment of relentless pressure, testing the resilience and unity of everyone involved. As the first 48 hours after the announcement passed, the story evolved into a narrative that blended personal tragedy, institutional responsibility, and global attention. The king's terminal illness became not just a family matter but a topic of international discourse, touching on history, diplomacy, tradition, and the future of monarchy itself. The public's fascination, empathy, and speculation created a complex web of emotional and informational layers, each reinforcing the gravity of the situation. By the end of the first week following the official revelation, it was clear that the palace, the family, and the public were entering a new chapter of shared anxiety and collective reflection. The announcement of King Charles's terminal illness had ignited a global conversation about mortality, leadership, and legacy. The royal family, now under unprecedented scrutiny, faced the challenge of navigating both personal grief and public expectation, each step carefully measured against the unyielding gaze of the world. The news of King Charles's terminal diagnosis hit Prince William with a force that was both immediate and lingering, reverberating through his mind, body, and soul in ways that were profoundly personal, yet intensely public. As the heir apparent, he had spent decades preparing for a future as king, meticulously learning the intricacies of governance, diplomacy, and ceremonial duties. But no amount of preparation could have readied him for the emotional weight of watching his father confront a terminal illness, a truth that would forever alter the landscape of their family and the monarchy itself. In the first hours after the palace statement, William retreated into private reflection. He found himself pacing the corridors of Kensington Palace, the echoes of his father's voice mingling with the silence of anticipation and fear. His mind raced through memories of childhood moments, from the gentle guidance during early school days to private conversations about responsibility, leadership, and moral duty. He recalled the first time his father had sat him down to discuss the pressures of public life, the inevitability of scrutiny, and the sacrifices demanded by their station. Those lessons, once distant and abstract, now carried a new, unbearable weight, amplified by the stark reality of his father's mortality. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. As Prince Charles's eldest son, William understood that the monarchy's continuity rested in part on his ability to remain composed, confident, and steady, yet the emotional turmoil threatened to overwhelm him at every turn. He grappled with conflicting emotions, deep sorrow for his father, fear of the unknown, and a pressing awareness that he would soon need to step fully into a leadership role under circumstances no son could ever desire. Even the most mundane tasks, reviewing schedules, responding to aides, signing official communications, became exercises in emotional endurance, each act reminding him of the fragility of life and the impermanence of authority. Late at night, William often found himself wandering the palace gardens, seeking solace in the stillness and isolation that the sprawling grounds provided. He remembered his father teaching him to appreciate these quiet moments, to observe the changing seasons, and to reflect on the rhythm of life. Now, those lessons took on a poignant, almost haunting resonance. He watched the moonlight glint off the leaves, the same way his father's crown gleamed in ceremonial light, and felt a profound mixture of admiration, grief, and inevitability. Every step through the garden was both literal and symbolic, a walk alongside memories of a man who had shaped him, prepared him, and now faced a finite future. The emotional burden extended beyond personal reflection. The public eye magnified every expression, gesture, and decision. Paparazzi lenses lingered longer, broadcast cameras captured fleeting moments, and social media dissected every appearance. William's composed exterior became a canvas for speculation. Some praised his stoicism, others questioned the depth of his engagement, and many attempted to interpret private emotions from public actions. The constant scrutiny created a tension between authenticity and performance. How could he express genuine grief while fulfilling the expectations of a nation that looked to him for stability and reassurance? Family dynamics also shifted dramatically. In private meetings, discussions with Princess and Catherine carried a new intensity, as each family member navigated the precarious balance between supporting King Charles, preparing for the inevitable transition, and managing their own emotional responses. William often found himself in the middle of these conversations, tasked with both leadership and mediation. He witnessed Anne's resolute composure, her determination to uphold duty above all else, juxtaposed with Catherine's subtle yet visible displays of empathy, worry, and compassion. The interplay of strength, vulnerability, and obligation created an intricate emotional landscape, one that required constant negotiation and understanding. The psychological toll was immense. William experienced restless nights, bouts of anxiety, and moments of intense introspection. He revisited the principles instilled by both parents, reflecting on the balance between duty and personal need, public perception and private emotion. Each memory of his father, an encouraging word, a shared laugh, a stern reminder of responsibility, became both a source of comfort and a reminder of impending loss. The inevitability of mortality, once abstract, had transformed into an intimate, pressing reality. Experts in grief and psychology have noted that individuals in positions of extreme responsibility often experience compounded stress when confronted with personal loss. In William's case, the dual pressures of public expectation and private emotion created a complex web of psychological tension. He needed to process his grief while maintaining composure, to support his family while preparing to assume expanded duties, and to navigate public engagement without compromising authenticity. The strain required immense resilience, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence, qualities that had been nurtured throughout his life, but were now tested to unprecedented levels. Public appearances became exercises in delicate emotional calibration. Each engagement required William to present a face of dignity and reassurance, even while the private knowledge of his father's condition weighed heavily on him. Every handshake, speech, and smile had layers of meaning, conveying stability, empathy, and leadership simultaneously. He understood that the public watched not only for information but for emotional cues, interpreting his reactions as reflections of the monarchy's strength and continuity. This duality, being both a grieving son and a symbol of national stability, required extraordinary discipline and composure. Catherine, as his partner, played a pivotal role in supporting William through these trials. Beyond the ceremonial duties and public expectations, she provided emotional grounding, subtle guidance, and practical support. She offered a listening ear during moments of vulnerability, a steady hand during crises, and a sense of perspective when the pressures of public life became overwhelming. Their partnership, forged in both love and duty, became a vital lifeline amid the storm of emotion, speculation, and responsibility. Within the family, private conversations often turned toward preparation, contingency planning, and reflection on King Charles's legacy. William engaged deeply in discussions about succession, charitable priorities, and the symbolic role of monarchy in modern society. He contemplated how to honor his father's contributions, manage public perception, and maintain family unity, all while confronting the profound personal loss looming ahead. Each decision carried weight, consequence, and scrutiny, intertwining the deeply personal with the highly public. As days passed, William's emotional journey continued to evolve. Moments of vulnerability surfaced in private, tears shed behind closed doors, quiet reflections on childhood memories, and whispered conversations with Catherine and trusted aides. Yet, these moments coexisted with unwavering commitment to duty, illustrating the delicate equilibrium between personal grief and public expectation. He navigated the complex terrain of emotion, obligation, and leadership with a resilience that resonated both within the palace walls and beyond. The anticipation of the inevitable also spurred introspection on legacy and purpose. William considered how his father's guidance, wisdom, and experiences would shape his own approach to leadership, diplomacy, and public service. He recognized the fragility of life, the weight of history, and the demands of a monarchy under scrutiny. The convergence of personal loss, familial responsibility, and public expectation created a unique crucible, forging a deeper understanding of duty, empathy, and the enduring nature of family bonds. Through it all, the world watched. Media outlets, commentators, and citizens alike observed William's every move, interpreting actions as reflections of personal emotion, leadership potential, and moral character. The global fascination underscored the extraordinary position he occupied. Simultaneously, a son facing profound grief, a future king preparing to lead, and a public figure embodying the stability of the monarchy in a time of uncertainty. Princess, and often hailed as the hardest-working member of the royal family, has always carried an air of quiet strength and unwavering commitment. From an early age, she demonstrated an unparalleled dedication to service, balancing royal duties with equestrian achievements, charitable initiatives, and international representation. Yet, even the most steadfast persona could not be fully immune to the seismic shock of learning that her father, King Charles, had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Anne's response to the news was complex, layered, and intensely human. While the public has long admired her for her composure, wit, and tireless work ethic, the private reality was far more intricate. In the early hours after the palace announcement, she retreated to her private quarters within Buckingham Palace, seeking solitude in the wake of news that would forever alter the family dynamic. She poured herself a cup of tea, a ritual ingrained since childhood, and allowed herself to process the depth of her emotions. Anguish, fear, and disbelief coalesced in her mind, each wave stronger than the last. Despite the personal turmoil, a sense of duty quickly reasserted itself. She understood the profound significance of maintaining stability during this delicate time, not only for the royal family, but for the nation itself. Monarchies, she reflected, survive not solely on lineage but on perception, ceremony, and the unwavering fulfillment of responsibility. Any sign of weakness, any moment of hesitation, could ripple outward, destabilizing centuries of tradition and public trust. And resolved that she would carry the mantle of composure with absolute precision, even as her heart trembled beneath the surface. Her immediate focus became supporting her siblings, particularly Prince William and Princess Catherine, both grappling with the emotional weight of the revelation, and recognized the subtleties of family dynamics, the silent pressures, the unspoken responsibilities, and the need for a balance between emotional support and practical guidance. She became a stabilizing force in meetings, ensuring conversations remained productive, organized, and forward-focused. In doing so, she quietly mediated tensions, smoothed over uncertainties, and preserved a sense of cohesion amid growing anxiety. Private correspondence with aides and palace advisors revealed Anne's meticulous attention to detail. She requested regular medical updates, sought counsel on succession planning, and organized confidential strategy sessions with senior staff to ensure the family was fully prepared for the months ahead. Her proactive approach reflected a lifelong pattern of prioritizing duty above personal comfort. Yet beneath the calculated efficiency lay profound vulnerability. Late at night, she allowed herself fleeting moments of reflection. The recollection of childhood memories with her father, lessons learned at Balmoral, and the rare instances of laughter and warmth that had punctuated her disciplined upbringing. Anne's public appearances during this period were a masterclass in emotional control. She attended charity events, ceremonial engagements, and official visits with a poise that belied the storm brewing within. Every handshake, every nod, and every smile carried layers of meaning: reassurance for the public, solidarity for her family, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the private pain she carried. Observers noted a subtle gravitas in her demeanor, a quiet intensity that spoke volumes about her commitment to duty and the personal sacrifice it entailed. Yet, even the most disciplined of individuals cannot entirely suppress the human experience of grief. Privately, Anne grappled with waves of anxiety, insomnia, and fleeting moments of anger. She questioned the fairness of fate, the fragility of life, and the inevitability of mortality. In whispered conversations with trusted aides, she expressed concerns about the future of the monarchy, the well-being of her siblings, and the preservation of her father's legacy. These candid admissions, though rare, revealed the depth of her emotional struggle and the extraordinary resilience required to navigate both personal and public spheres simultaneously. The weight of expectation was amplified by Anne's historical role as a mediator within the royal family. Over the years, she had often been called upon to smooth tensions, reconcile differing viewpoints, and maintain harmony during periods of controversy or conflict. In the face of her father's terminal diagnosis, these skills became indispensable. She negotiated conversations with tact and precision, ensuring that discussions about medical care, succession, and family responsibilities remained productive, respectful, and aligned with both protocol and empathy. Her ability to balance emotional truth with measured action became a cornerstone of the family's coping strategy. Psychologists specializing in grief and high-stakes responsibility note that individuals in Anne's position often experience what is called dual processing grief, a phenomenon where one simultaneously navigates personal sorrow while managing external obligations. Anne's daily routine exemplified this pattern. She moved seamlessly between moments of private reflection and public duty, allowing neither to fully dominate yet ensuring that both received attention. In this delicate balancing act, she demonstrated an emotional intelligence and resilience that few could rival, embodying the essence of leadership under pressure. Anne's relationship with Catherine also became increasingly significant during this time. Catherine, while embodying a calming presence and empathetic approach, relied on Anne's experience, judgment, and decisiveness to navigate the turbulent emotional and procedural waters that the family now faced. The two women engaged in candid discussions, sharing concerns, strategizing responses, and providing mutual support. Anne's mentorship offered Catherine both reassurance and practical guidance, reinforcing the importance of intergenerational collaboration within the royal hierarchy. Even within these intense circumstances, Anne found moments of reflection that illuminated the enduring bond between father and daughter. She recalled her first horseback rides with King Charles, lessons on poise and determination, and private conversations that revealed his hopes, fears, and unwavering commitment to service. These memories became both a source of comfort and a reminder of the profound responsibility she now carried to honor her father, support her family, and uphold the dignity of the monarchy in the shadow of loss. In the palace corridors, the subtle signs of Anne's influence became apparent. Staff noted her calm, measured approach in meetings, her thoughtful interventions in delicate discussions, and her unwavering commitment to duty despite the emotional turbulence surrounding her. Observers recognized that her presence provided a stabilizing force, a quiet yet powerful testament to the role of experience, preparation, and inner strength in navigating one of the most challenging periods in the royal family's recent history. As the days unfolded, Anne's dual role as daughter and royal figure became increasingly intertwined. She participated in private family gatherings with warmth and empathy, while simultaneously attending to the strategic and ceremonial responsibilities required by her position. Each decision carried multiple layers of consequence, demanding a balance between personal sentiment, family solidarity, and the symbolic needs of a nation closely watching every move. Through it all, Anne's unshakable resolve and steadfast dedication became a defining element of the royal family's response to King Charles's terminal illness. Her ability to manage grief while embodying composure, her proactive approach to planning and communication, and her deep commitment to family and duty exemplified the extraordinary pressures faced by individuals at the highest levels of public service. In the intersection of personal loss and public expectation, Anne's character shone as a beacon of resilience, illustrating both the human vulnerability and the disciplined strength required to navigate such unprecedented circumstances. Prince William, heir apparent and figure of intense public scrutiny, faced a revelation that shook him to his core. While he had long prepared for the prospect of ascending the throne, nothing could have readied him for the stark reality that his father, King Charles, had only months left to live. The news struck like lightning during a private briefing in the depths of Buckingham Palace, where medical specialists, royal aides, and senior advisors convened to relay the gravity of the situation. William had always been a blend of composure and empathy, a prince who meticulously balanced duty with heartfelt concern for the people he represented. Yet, in the private confines of his office, the weight of mortality pressed down with unprecedented force. He sat quietly, staring at the ornate patterns of the carpet, replaying memories of his childhood, the laughter echoing through Clarence's house, lessons on responsibility, and late-night conversations with his father about the burdens and privileges of royalty. Those recollections, once comforting, now pierced him with a raw sense of inevitability. The initial shock quickly gave way to a torrent of emotion. Anger, disbelief, and sorrow collided with a pressing sense of responsibility. How could he navigate the coming months with dignity and discretion? How could he manage the household, the kingdom's expectations, and the public's insatiable curiosity while personally grappling with grief? He knew that his every move would be scrutinized, dissected by journalists, historians, and global audiences, each looking for signs of weakness or indecision. The pressure was nearly suffocating. Despite the emotional turmoil, William understood the necessity of action. He immediately began coordinating with senior palace staff, legal advisors, and his siblings to map out contingency plans. Discussions ranged from succession protocols to ceremonial adjustments, public messaging, and private family strategies. Every decision carried profound implications, and William's meticulous attention to detail became both a shield and a compass. Yet, beneath the layers of planning, his human vulnerability remained intact, manifesting in fleeting moments of isolation and quiet reflection. Family dynamics added a profound layer of complexity. William was acutely aware of the varied reactions within the royal household. Princess, and steadfast and pragmatic, provided a model of composure, yet her inner struggle was evident to him in the subtle shifts of her expressions and the quiet tension in her voice. Catherine, whose empathy and emotional intelligence offered a balancing counterweight, leaned on William for guidance, reassurance, and clarity amid the uncertainty. Together, they navigated the turbulent waters of grief, responsibility, and protocol, forming an intricate web of support and leadership. One of the most harrowing challenges William faced was managing his relationship with King Charles in the midst of this crisis. The knowledge that his father's time was limited created an urgency to reconcile any unspoken tensions, express unvoiced gratitude, and preserve precious moments that might otherwise be lost. In private encounters, William found himself oscillating between careful composure and bursts of raw emotion. Conversations that once seemed routine were now laden with weight. A simple remark about a project or a casual joke carried the undertones of finality, urgency, and love. The prince's emotional journey was compounded by the necessity of public appearances. Even in the face of personal devastation, he attended engagements with the precision expected of an heir to the throne. Whether inaugurating charitable initiatives, attending state functions, or interacting with the public, William maintained a facade of calm and poise. Observers noted a subtle gravity in his demeanor, a quiet intensity in his gaze, and a measured cadence in his speech, all signaling both awareness of the looming loss and a steadfast commitment to duty. At home, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken concern. Conversations among family members often began with procedural matters and ended with intimate reflections on love, legacy, and the fleeting nature of life. William found himself mediating, comforting, and directing in equal measure, ensuring that discussions remained productive while also honoring the deep emotional currents running beneath the surface. These moments, though private, revealed the extraordinary psychological balancing act required of a future king confronting the imminent loss of his father. In parallel, William began contemplating his own future ascension in a more tangible way than ever before. The terminal diagnosis cast a stark light on the responsibilities he would soon inherit. The symbolic representation of the monarchy, the management of the royal household, and the intricate dance of public perception, diplomacy, and ceremonial duties. Thoughts that were once theoretical now assumed an urgent, almost pressing reality. He pondered questions that had previously lingered on the periphery of consciousness. How will history remember him? Can he honor his father's legacy while forging his own path? What does it truly mean to serve a nation at a time when personal grief threatens to overwhelm him? Counsel from trusted advisors became essential during this period. Senior palace aides emphasized the importance of measured communication, discretion, and careful management of information. William took these recommendations seriously, understanding that any misstep could not only affect his personal life, but also destabilize public confidence in the monarchy. Every phone call, every memo, and every meeting was conducted with a heightened awareness of consequence, intertwining strategy with emotional reality. Despite the outward composure, moments of private vulnerability were inevitable. In the solitude of his chambers, William allowed himself to confront fear, sorrow, and the haunting inevitability of loss. Tears were shed quietly, often in the darkened hours before dawn, when the palace was still and the weight of history pressed down without interruption. These moments were not signs of weakness, but affirmations of humanity, reflections of a man who, despite being groomed for kingship, remained profoundly human in his love for his father and family. William's interactions with Catherine, in particular, highlighted the intimate dynamics of shared grief and leadership. Together, they navigated not only personal loss but the responsibilities of managing a household and preparing their own children for a reality they could scarcely understand. Catherine's gentle guidance, empathy, and emotional insight complemented William's strategic mind, creating a partnership capable of both resilience and grace under pressure. The couple's private discussions often revolved around balancing public duty with personal preservation, ensuring that their emotional well-being did not succumb entirely to the weight of expectation. The broader implications of King Charles's terminal illness extended beyond immediate family concerns. William became acutely aware of the national and international attention this revelation would command, from global media outlets to government officials, diplomats, and the public at large. He understood the necessity of framing the family's response with dignity, transparency, and empathy, while also safeguarding the privacy and integrity of their most intimate moments. In this, William demonstrated an emerging mastery of leadership, balancing emotion with calculated action and vulnerability with resolve. Perhaps the most profound aspect of William's emotional reckoning was the reconciliation of personal grief with public duty. Every decision, every gesture, every interaction was imbued with dual significance. It reflected his love and concern for his father while also projecting strength, stability, and continuity to a watching world. He grappled with the paradox of mourning in public and leading in private, recognizing that the monarchy's survival depended not on the suppression of emotion, but on its careful channeling into purpose and action. In essence, Prince William's journey during these months was a profound meditation on responsibility, love, and the human condition. The terminal diagnosis of King Charles forced him to confront questions that most individuals never face, magnifying the inherent tensions between private emotion and public expectation. Through meticulous planning, unwavering support for family members, and moments of private reflection, William exemplified the extraordinary resilience required of a future monarch facing the inevitability of personal loss. His experience underscored the delicate interplay between duty and emotion, strategy and vulnerability, illustrating the remarkable complexities of life at the very pinnacle of royalty. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, has long been celebrated for her unwavering dedication to duty, her disciplined work ethic, and her remarkable ability to maintain composure under pressure. Yet, the revelation of King Charles's terminal illness presented a challenge unlike any she had encountered before. The news, delivered discreetly in a secure palace chamber alongside her siblings, struck her with a unique combination of sorrow, urgency, and responsibility. Unlike her younger brother William, whose position as heir apparent placed him in direct line for succession planning, Anne's role required a delicate balance between supporting her family and fulfilling her extensive public commitments. From the moment the news was confirmed, Anne understood the stakes. Her mind, usually a meticulous catalog of engagements, charity initiatives, and royal protocols, now had to accommodate the weighty reality of mortality, familial grief, and the unrelenting gaze of the public. She found herself reflecting on decades of service, moments of triumph, and instances of personal sacrifice. Those experiences, which once seemed like routine obligations, now coalesced into a deeper understanding of the fragility of life and the enduring responsibilities of monarchy. The immediate concern for Anne was the emotional stability of the family. She knew that her stoic demeanor could serve as a model for both her siblings and extended relatives. In private, she encouraged conversations that allowed for the expression of grief, questions about contingency plans, and discussions about the legacy of their father's reign. Her voice, measured yet resolute, became a grounding presence in a household teetering between profound sadness and the necessity for decisive action. Anne's own emotions, however, were far from subdued. She experienced a visceral mix of grief, disbelief, and an intense desire to protect her father from the pressures of public scrutiny. Each private meeting with King Charles carried the tension of unspoken fears and unarticulated hopes. She observed his subtle gestures, the way he paused mid-sentence, the faint tremor in his hands, the exhaustion in his eyes, and felt a deep empathy that threatened to overwhelm even her well-honed composure. At the same time, Anne recognized the importance of masking vulnerability during public appearances, knowing that her outward strength would set the tone for the monarchy's image and reassure a watching world. Her relationship with William and Catherine became increasingly pivotal. In strategy meetings convened to navigate the unfolding crisis, and often acted as both mediator and advisor. She facilitated discussions with a keen awareness of each family member's emotional state, ensuring that plans were realistic, compassionate, and coherent. Her analytical mind dissected options with surgical precision, weighing the emotional, symbolic, and practical implications of every decision. Anne's influence extended beyond logistics. She helped her brother reconcile personal grief with public obligation, and she provided Catherine with a candid yet empathetic perspective on the delicate balance of royal duties. One particularly intense moment occurred during a late-night planning session in which William and Catherine gathered in a private study to review communication strategies. The objective was to carefully orchestrate the release of information to the public, ensuring transparency while safeguarding the family's dignity. And, always mindful of precedent and protocol, insisted on a measured approach, highlighting the risks of premature disclosure and the potential for public misunderstanding. Her guidance, delivered with a mix of authority and empathy, helped shape a plan that was both strategically sound and emotionally considerate, reflecting the dual imperatives of duty and compassion. While her public persona remained stoic and unflappable, and privately confronted the profound emotional consequences of her father's condition. In solitary moments within her quarters, she reflected on memories that spanned her entire life. Childhood lessons from her parents, intimate family vacations, quiet conversations, and the subtle guidance her father had offered over the years. These recollections, once comforting, now carried the bittersweet weight of imminence and the awareness that these moments would soon belong solely to memory. Anne's approach to grief was distinctive. Rather than succumbing to despair or allowing emotion to dictate action, she channeled her feelings into purposeful effort. She intensified her engagement with charitable organizations, ensuring that the work she had committed to over decades would continue uninterrupted. She coordinated with palace staff to oversee essential functions, from ceremonial preparations to security protocols, demonstrating a remarkable capacity to remain operational under extraordinary personal stress. Through this, Anne exemplified the principle that strength and vulnerability are not mutually exclusive but can coexist in the service of responsibility and integrity. Communication became a critical tool for and during this period. She meticulously drafted statements, collaborated with public relations advisors, and rehearsed responses for potential media inquiries. Each word was scrutinized for tone, clarity, and emotional resonance, ensuring that the family's message would convey respect for King Charles, transparency for the public, and reassurance for global audiences. And understood that the monarchy's credibility hinged on the perception of composure, empathy, and strategic foresight, and she approached this task with both diligence and profound personal investment. The weight of expectation, his every action scrutinized by the public, press, and palace insiders alike. Yet nothing could have prepared him for the day the truth about his father's terminal illness was confirmed. The reality struck with a force that left him momentarily paralyzed, caught between the roles of son and future king. In that moment, the boy who had once clung to his father for comfort during childhood uncertainties now found himself thrust into the role of protector, strategist, and public figurehead simultaneously. William's first instinct was disbelief. He had spent decades watching King Charles navigate health concerns, minor ailments, and even political controversies with remarkable resilience. This new reality, however, was a finality that could not be ignored or managed through ceremony or diplomacy. The corridors of the palace, often echoing with protocol and routine, now seemed to carry the weight of urgency, a constant reminder of time slipping irreversibly away. In private, William grappled with the overwhelming complexity of emotions: fear, grief, anger, and a profound sense of responsibility, all intertwined in a knot that seemed impossible to untangle. In the immediate aftermath, William's focus shifted toward logistics. He understood that succession planning was no longer theoretical. It had become an urgent matter. He convened discreet meetings with advisors, legal experts, and key palace personnel to outline the protocols that would need to be followed in the coming weeks. Every decision, from ceremonial arrangements to public communication, required precision and foresight. Yet, even amid the strategic planning, he could not ignore the emotional dimension of the crisis. His siblings, Catherine, and close family members were navigating their own grief, and William recognized that his role extended beyond administrative oversight. It demanded empathy, steadiness, and a capacity to project calm even when his inner turmoil threatened to surface. One of the most challenging aspects for William was reconciling his public obligations with private mourning. Royal life affords little privacy, and the world was already watching, speculating, and waiting for signals of both strength and weakness. Every gesture, word, or facial expression carried amplified significance. William felt the tension between authenticity and performance acutely. He wanted to be vulnerable, to express love and sorrow openly. Yet he also knew that maintaining composure was essential to reassure the nation and the wider Commonwealth. This duality, the constant negotiation between personal emotion and public expectation, became the invisible burden he carried day and night. In the weeks following the revelation, William's interactions with his father became profoundly introspective. He sought moments of quiet conversation, shared memories, and guidance from the man who had shaped his understanding of leadership, duty, and moral responsibility. They spoke about the past, reminiscing about childhood adventures, pivotal life lessons, and the shared joys of family milestones. These conversations, imbued with tenderness and unspoken fears, were punctuated by moments of vulnerability rarely witnessed by the public. William came to understand that the true inheritance from his father extended far beyond titles and responsibilities. It included wisdom, resilience, and the nuanced understanding of what it means to lead with integrity during crises. Catherine's presence proved instrumental in helping William navigate this emotionally charged period. Her unwavering support provided him with a sense of stability and shared purpose. She became both confidant and collaborator, offering perspectives that combined practical insight with deep emotional intelligence. Together, they managed family communications, public statements, and logistical preparations, often spending long nights coordinating the delicate balance between secrecy, transparency, and compassion. In private, she provided a mirror for his emotions, gently challenging him to confront feelings of fear, sadness, and uncertainty, while reinforcing the necessity of outward composure. The revelation also forced William to reevaluate his relationships with extended family and advisors. Trusted aides were briefed discreetly, and channels of communication were scrutinized to prevent leaks and rumors. William recognized that misinformation could exacerbate the family's anxiety and undermine public trust. Each interaction, whether in private consultation or formal strategy session, carried a heightened sense of significance. He learned to navigate conflicting advice, varying emotional responses from family members, and the relentless pressure of historical precedent, all while managing the profound personal grief of watching his father's health decline. Emotionally, William experienced waves of guilt, wondering if he could have detected signs earlier or intervened in ways that might have altered outcomes. He also confronted the reality that leadership often demands making decisions when clarity is clouded by emotion. Every choice, from the timing of public announcements to the orchestration of family gatherings, had the potential to ripple outward, affecting national sentiment, media portrayal, and the internal dynamics of the royal household. William grappled with these complexities daily, recognizing that his actions would set precedents and influence the legacy of the monarchy for years to come. Despite the heavy emotional load, William found moments of clarity and purpose. He reflected on lessons from his father's tenure, the importance of service over self-interest, and the necessity of balancing tradition with the evolving expectations of a modern monarchy. These reflections shaped his approach to the crisis, enabling him to make decisions grounded in both strategic foresight and emotional intelligence. He drew strength from a combination of personal resilience, Catherine's partnership, and the collective support of his siblings, realizing that leadership is often about standing firm amidst uncertainty while nurturing the humanity of those around you. The emotional intensity of this period also revealed William's deep sense of moral responsibility. He recognized that the world would look to him not merely for leadership, but for authenticity. Every interaction, from private family conversations to rare public appearances, became an exercise in balancing empathy with authority. William's demeanor, often described as measured and composed, now carried a deeper gravitas, signaling both personal grief and a readiness to assume the mantle of leadership when the time arrived. Through all this, William continued to honor the essence of his father's guidance, leading with integrity, demonstrating compassion, and maintaining a steadfast commitment to duty. He embraced the duality of his position, accepting that grief and responsibility are inseparable when family and monarchy converge under extraordinary circumstances. By navigating these challenges with deliberate care, introspection, and unwavering resolve, William emerged as both a devoted son and a future monarch prepared to guide the kingdom through a period of profound transition. Ultimately, Prince William's journey during King Charles's terminal illness underscores the immense pressures of royal life, where personal vulnerability intersects with public expectation. His experience illustrates the emotional complexity of leadership under duress, the delicate negotiation between grief and duty, and the profound impact of familial bonds in times of crisis. William's resilience, strategic acumen, and empathetic engagement reflect not only his preparation for kingship, but also the enduring strength of a son determined to honor his father's legacy while navigating one of the most challenging periods of his life. Princess, and often described as the most unassuming yet formidable member of the royal family, found herself navigating a delicate and emotionally charged situation as news of King Charles's terminal illness spread within the palace walls. Unlike her younger siblings, Anne's approach to crisis management is methodical, calculated, and deeply strategic, reflecting decades of experience in royal duties, charitable engagements, and diplomatic navigation. This time, however, the stakes were profoundly personal. The realization that her father had only months to live brought an acute awareness that careful orchestration, discretion, and foresight would be required not merely for public appearances, but for the emotional well-being and stability of the entire family. Anne's first response, upon receiving the confidential news, was to retreat into careful observation. She absorbed the nuances of her siblings' reactions, cataloged the immediate needs of each family member, and began constructing a mental framework for action. Whereas Prince William exhibited visible tension, grappling with both grief and the weight of succession, and recognized that her role required quiet intervention. She could see the raw edges of fear and uncertainty in her siblings' faces and understood that without her guidance, emotions could easily spiral into conflict, miscommunication, or rash decisions that might compromise the family's unity. Anne's capacity to maintain calm amidst the storm had been honed over decades, a skill that would now prove indispensable. In the private chambers of Buckingham Palace, Anne convened discreet conversations with key advisors and household staff, emphasizing both sensitivity and operational clarity. She ensured that every step taken in the following weeks, from scheduling private family consultations to managing sensitive communications with medical teams, was coordinated to prevent leaks, preserve dignity, and uphold the public image of the monarchy. This was Anne's arena, where precision met empathy, and where her uncanny ability to anticipate potential complications made her a stabilizing force. She understood that the palace would soon face a barrage of media speculation, and without careful management, misinformation could quickly overshadow the truth. While her siblings wrestled with their emotions and focused on actionable priorities, she meticulously reviewed every aspect of King Charles's upcoming schedule, balancing the need for public appearances with the necessity of rest and privacy. She liaised with royal medical professionals, ensuring that treatments, consultations, and palliative care plans were seamlessly integrated with ceremonial obligations. Yet she did all this with an unspoken understanding. Her father's comfort and dignity were paramount. Anne's devotion was practical, but profoundly human. She recognized that behind the crown and the public scrutiny lay the vulnerability of a father, a man whose health had become fragile, whose time was limited, and also became a confidant and mediator within the family. She observed the subtle dynamics between William and Catherine, between younger royals and their advisors, and positioned herself as a neutral yet authoritative presence. When tensions arose, she intervened gently, often posing questions that encouraged reflection rather than confrontation. Her guidance was never overtly directive. Instead, it relied on subtle nudges, careful framing, and strategic foresight. In many ways, and became the invisible hand holding the family's equilibrium together during moments when grief, anxiety, and uncertainty threatened to unravel them. As days turned into weeks, Anne's role extended beyond immediate crisis management. She began to consider the long-term implications of her father's illness for the monarchy. This included succession planning, the timing of official announcements, and the careful calibration of public messaging to maintain confidence among citizens, diplomats, and the media. She knew that every detail mattered, from the tone of press releases to the scheduling of private meetings with heads of state. Anne's keen understanding of protocol, combined with her intuitive grasp of human emotion, allowed her to anticipate challenges before they materialized, positioning the royal family to navigate this period with dignity and coherence. Despite her focus on logistics and strategy, Anne's personal grief was ever present. Moments of solitude revealed the depth of her sorrow, a mixture of love, regret, and unspoken fears. She reflected on her father's legacy, his achievements, and the private moments they had shared, many of which were hidden from public view. These reflections were tinged with the bittersweet realization that time, once taken for granted, was now fleeting. Anne's stoic exterior masked an inner tempest, yet she channeled this emotion into purpose, transforming grief into actionable support for her family. Anne's relationship with her father also became more poignant during this period. She sought out moments of quiet connection, recalling childhood memories, shared passions, and life lessons imparted over decades. These interactions were intimate, often filled with unspoken understanding, subtle gestures of reassurance, and the kind of companionship that transcends words. And recognized that her father's remaining time carried both a profound personal significance and a symbolic weight for the monarchy. She approached each day with deliberate intention, ensuring that her presence contributed to his comfort and the family's cohesion. At the same time, Anne observed the public and media narrative with keen insight. She anticipated the speculation, rumor-mongering, and scrutiny that would inevitably follow any revelation about King Charles's health. Drawing on her experience in handling sensitive communications, Anne collaborated with palace officials to shape messaging that balanced transparency with discretion. She understood that the world would be watching not only the monarch's condition but the family's response, and that every gesture, public appearances, statements, and interviews would be dissected for clues. Anne's interventions ensured that the family presented a unified front while maintaining the necessary privacy to process their emotions authentically. The challenge of reconciling personal grief with public duty was immense, yet Anne navigated it with remarkable composure. She became a pillar for her siblings, an advisor to William and Catherine, and a discreet but influential force within the palace hierarchy. Her capacity to integrate empathy, strategy, and foresight allowed the royal family to function effectively despite the emotional turbulence surrounding King Charles's terminal illness. Anne's actions reflected a profound understanding of both human psychology and institutional responsibility, highlighting her role as the royal strategist in times of crisis. Ultimately, Princess Anne's response to her father's terminal illness underscores the complexity of royal life, where personal vulnerability is intertwined with public expectation. Her meticulous planning, emotional intelligence, and unwavering dedication exemplify the qualities necessary to sustain leadership during moments of profound uncertainty. Through her efforts, and not only supported her family emotionally, but also ensured that the monarchy could navigate an impending transition with dignity, coherence, and a sense of purpose that transcended individual grief. Within the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, a storm was quietly raging. The announcement of King Charles's terminal illness had triggered a cascade of unseen challenges for the royal household, a labyrinthine network of staff, advisors, and aides whose loyalty was tested at every turn. The palace had long operated under a veil of secrecy, where every gesture, every word, and every glance could carry immense significance. Yet, in the wake of the shocking revelation, that same secrecy became both a shield and a source of tension, as staff navigated the delicate balance between duty, discretion, and personal concern. At the center of this delicate dance were the senior household officials, individuals who had devoted decades of their lives to the monarchy. These were the keepers of protocol, the orchestrators of daily life, and the guardians of the royal family's public image. They faced an unprecedented dilemma: how to manage a terminally ill monarch whose private suffering could not be fully hidden, while simultaneously preserving the dignity of the institution and shielding the family from premature public scrutiny. Every decision, from scheduling engagements to preparing press statements, required meticulous planning, precise timing, and an acute awareness of potential ripple effects. The first priority for the household was containment. Word of King Charles's condition had already begun to circulate among a select few within the palace, and the risk of leaks to the media was high. Staff members who were entrusted with sensitive information became key players in a web of loyalty and vigilance. Senior aides implemented strict protocols. Communications were monitored, access to the king was limited, and even routine correspondence underwent additional scrutiny. These measures were not merely bureaucratic. They were an essential lifeline for maintaining stability, ensuring that misinformation did not compound the already heightened emotional strain within the family. Alongside containment, the royal household also had to manage the operational chaos that accompanies a medical crisis at the heart of a monarchy. King Charles's schedule, previously predictable and ceremonial, suddenly required constant adaptation. Advisors coordinated with medical teams to prioritize his health, while balancing public duties that could not be deferred. Each day presented a complex logistical puzzle: private meetings with heads of state, ceremonial obligations, and the king's personal engagements had to be reconfigured to accommodate fatigue, treatment schedules, and periods of rest. The household became a finely tuned machine, operating behind the scenes to allow the royal family a semblance of normalcy amid extraordinary circumstances. Despite the outward appearance of calm, the palace corridors were filled with tension and unease. Staff members, long accustomed to discretion and decorum, found themselves confronting emotions rarely permitted within the royal sphere: fear, anxiety, and the weight of impending loss. Some aides struggled with divided loyalties, torn between their professional obligations and personal empathy for the family they had served for decades. Confidences had to be maintained, rumors had to be quelled, and every misstep risked both personal and institutional consequences. The emotional toll on the household was palpable, yet each member understood the stakes and rose to meet them with steadfast professionalism. Princess Anne's strategic influence extended into the household's operations. Her careful guidance ensured that staff were not merely reactive but proactive, anticipating challenges before they escalated. She facilitated clear channels of communication between medical personnel, senior aides, and the royal family, minimizing confusion and preventing misunderstandings that could exacerbate tension. Anne's presence also provided a moral compass. She reminded staff of the human dimension of their roles, emphasizing empathy alongside efficiency, and instilling a sense of purpose amidst the pressure.